In this series, we are going to see how to make a game in Unity. We can't cover all of the Unity in one video, so in this video we are going to make player movement only. So let's get started. This is what we call Unity Editor. It is divided into 4 parts. First is the hierarchy window. We create game object, player, ground, etc. Next is the scene. In this window we see the actual gameplay. Next is the inspector window. In this window we add components to the game object. Last one is the scene. In this window we create scripts. So now let's create a ground for our player to stand on. To create a ground, first right-click on hierarchy window, then click on 3D objects, then click on plane. And it will come with some components. Let's talk about them one by one. First off, all this rename section. From this we can rename the ground to anything else. Now the transform component, there are 3 sections in it. First one is the position. If you change the number of position, it will get teleported to different location. Now the rotate section. If you change the number of it, it will get rotate from XYZ axis. Now the scale section. As you change the number of it, it will get bigger from XYZ axis. Now the plane renderer. It is basically just allow the camera to render it. Now the mesh render. It is just upgraded version of plane mesh render. It allow the ground to change the color, lighting, etc. Now the mesh collider. It allows anything like object, player, etc. to stand on it. Now let's make our player. First right-click on hierarchy window, then click on 3D objects, then click on capsule. If it come under ground, then drag it up. Just like this. Then you can also rename it like this. And then the capsule will come with these 4 components too. These are the same components like the ground, nothing special in these. But you can make it special by adding components yourself. By clicking on Add Components and type Rigid Body and add Rigid Body component. This is what Rigidity components looks like. Let's talk it about one by one. First one is the mass. Higher mass objects push lower mass objects more when colliding. Now the drag. Drag can be used to slow down an object. Now the angular drag. The tendency of an object to slow down due to friction with the air or water that surrounds it. Now use gravity. It is basically allow the player to use gravity. Interpolate. It is decided on what you are doing, like if you are making player movement, then you choose that option. It is basically for performance. Collision detector. It is basically to detect collision. Constraints. It is basically to freeze XYZ axis gravity. Info. Info is basically to give info about speed, gravity, movement, transform position. Angular drag and velocity. Also velocity is just like your y-axis, means you are in air. And now we know rigid body completely. Also in rigid body interpolate section, I recommend you to use the interpolate, and in collision detector use continuous for the best performance of movement. Also don't forget to freeze rotation, otherwise this will happen. It happened because players start falling from XYZ axis. Also rigid body component, add physics and gravity to the object. Also we need to code when we want to add custom components. To add custom components, we need to make script. To make script, we need to first right-click on project window, then click on create, then click on C# script. Then you can name it anything like player movement. And when you click on it, we'll get this overview. So let's talk about it. First on the top you will get the file name. Under your file name you will get 2 options. First open, second execution order. If you click on open, it will open Visual Studio. This is the place where you can code. And if you click on the execution order, it will tell how the code will be executed. Now this weird window. This window will give you an overview of the code. You can't change the code from here. This is what you get when you open any script. So let's talk about it one by one. So first is using system.collection. So it basically provides additional data structures compatible with the Unity jobs system. Next is system.collection.generic. So it basically provides a more compact way to leverage the stuff you can access through extensions methods aside. So now Unity Engine. So basically let us import and assemble assets, write code to interact with your objects, create or import animations for use with an advanced animation system. Now we learn what these 3 lines do. Now let's move on. Now this public class line, so it basically tell which script we are using. So now let's talk about void start and void update functions. First, the void stat function. So it basically runs the code once we enter our game. Now the void update function. It runs the code every time when we start the game and end the game. So now let's start some coding. First we need to type require component character controller. So I tell what this do, so it will create a component named as character controller when we put the script into the object or the player. Character controller allows you to easily do movement constrained by collisions without having to deal with a rigid body. So now we need to create a public variable for our camera. There are 2 variables in Unity. First one is public and second one is the private. I tell you difference between them. Public variable is accessible to any other class that references it, even the Unity editor. Private variable is not accessible by any other method or class, not even the Unity editor. Now let's create a public float function for our walk speed. Also I tell you what is float. There are 3 more variables that we use while coding. First is float. Second is int. Third is bool. The difference between them is that float variable is used to store value like 0.1, 4.3, 29.4 etc. Now the int we use int to store value like 0, 1, 3, there are not decimal between them. Now the bool variable we use bool variable to store true and false value. Now we need to make our sprint speed as a public float and it will be 12 by default. Now we need to make our jump power as public float and by default it will be 7. Now we need to make gravity. Also the reason why we are using gravity because when we jump we also want something to put us back down. Now we need to make look speed for our mouse for sensitivity. Now we need look X limit, it is because to stop the player to don't move the mouse 360. If this was not present you could not move your mouse upwards. Now let's talk about vector 3. So vector 3 is just a 3-dimensional vector. And vector 3 move direction is used to target position transform. And then we need to make move direction vector 3 to vector 3 0. Now we want our rotation of our mouse x-axis to 0. Now we want to make a public bool for can move and make true in the start. Also I will tell later why we was doing this. Now we want to make reference to our character controller component as a character controller. Now in void start we want to tell the Unity that character controller is a character controller component which we make reference to. Then we want to make cursor a lock state and make the cursor invisible in these 2 lines. And because of this when we click on play then click on the scene then our cursor will be locked and will not be visible. Then we want to create a region for handle movement which will do this. Then we want to make a vector 3 forward equals to transform position forward. And this allows the player to move forward. Now we want to make vector 3 right to transform direction vector 3 right. This allows the player to move right. Now we want to make bool of is running true when we press left shift. This is where the shift button is present on keyboard. Now we want a float of cursor speed x to can move. This question mark mean if it is true or false. After it we want to check is running true or false, then sprint speed, then walk speed, then this input mean the input keyboard after. It get axis mean the value will be in the range -1, 1 for keyboard and joystick input devices. Now horizontal mean in Unity input system. Now we want to do same for horizontal. Now we want to make reference to move direction as move direction.y as float. Then we want to make move direction without any variable to vector forward which we create earlier times cursor speed x then plus it with vector right times cursor speed y. Then we want to end the region of handle movement. Then we want to create a region for handles jumping. Now we want to create a statement of if. There are only 2 statements in Unity. First is if and second if else so. Use if to specify a block of code to be executed if a specified condition is true. Use else to specify a block of code to be executed if the same condition is false. Back to coding. After it we want to input jump. Also jump means spacebar in Unity and we want to check if canMove is true and character controller is grounded. If this was not present the player can jump infinitely. If it is true then our move direction.y will become jump power. If it is false then nothing will happen because move direction.y is already move direction y. After it if character controller is not grounded then we can't jump. Then we want to end the region of handles jumping. Then we want to create a region for handles rotation. And this region will handle rotation of mouse. Then we want to multiply the character controller.move by move direction and by time.delta time. Time delta is used when it is used in update time. Delta time is equal to the time between frames. If canMove is true then rotation x will be plussed by plus equals operator. This operator is used as a quick way to add one integer to a numeric value without having to type extra code. After is get axis mouse y will be multiplied by look speed. Then we want to make rotation x to math.clamp. Math.clamp means the clamp's given value between a range defined by the given minimum integer and maximum integer values. Then multiply it by rotation and subtract by lock x limit, then multiply by look x limit. After it player camera local rotation. Also local rotation means the rotation of the transform relative to the transform rotation of the parent. Then make it as quaternion.Euler. Quaternion.Euler returns a rotation that rotates z degrees around the z-axis, x degrees around the x-axis, and y degrees around the y-axis, applied in that order. Then make the rotation x 0 and y 0. Then we want to add the transform rotation using asterisk equals operator and use quaternion.Euler and multiple the mouse x by look speed and make the y 0. Also make sure to end region of handles rotation. If you want to take screenshots you can take right now. Also the link to this will be in description. Now we are finally done coding. After you done coding put the script into your player. Look as we put the script into the player it make the character controller component with it. Now we want to put a camera into player camera section. Now we can't just put the main camera into player camera section. For this to work we need to create a camera ourselves by right-clicking on hierarchy window then click on camera. Then you can name it anything like player camera. Also make sure it is like this other the camera will stay on its place. For this to work we need to make the camera as a child of player so that the camera will move with the player. Also make sure it to disable the main camera otherwise it will show the preview of the main camera. Now put the player camera on the top of your player. After it put the player camera into player camera section. And now you have successfully complete player movement. And you can move with a BCD and with arrows keys you can jump with spacebar and you can sprint or run with shift key. Now that's it for today and part 2 coming soon.